Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us at a National Housing Federation first Together with Tenants resident webinar. My name's Fleur Stevens, and I am a policy leader with the National Housing Federation, and I lead on Together with Tenants. I am absolutely delighted to see so many people able to join our webinar this morning. Over the next hour, we're going to be talking through the National Housing Federation's Together with Tenants programme. Our speakers today are myself, Valerie, Neil and Janet, and they are going to offer you their insight. And please take full advantage of them being here with us today and get your questions to them. We will speak for about 25 minutes, which will leave plenty of time for us to cover your questions at the end. Before we get started, I'd like to welcome Anna and Becca, who are with us to help with any technical glitches that may happen over the course of the webinar. It being Friday the 13th, that is probably likely, but let's hope not. If this is your first go-to webinar, you will see on the side that there is a panel and it will look like this. And this is your dashboard. You can close this panel using the red arrow shown on the slide there. So you can see more of the speakers whilst they're talking. And if you have any issues with the sound, just check your audio tab, which is indicated on the slide as well. And then at the bottom there, you can see where you can pop your questions should you have any. Do feel free to ask any questions as we go along in the chat function. Becca will be keeping an eye on the questions and will feed them through to me as the chair so we can make sure we get to them at the end. Probably we will have many more questions than we can get through, but I will do my absolute best to get answers to all of you. This webinar is being recorded and a recording will be made available afterwards. And we'll email that to you to the email address that you used to register today. I said earlier that this webinar represents a first for the National Housing Federation. This is the first time that we've delivered a webinar specifically for residents of our housing association members. And I'm so pleased to see how many people have signed up to this webinar and logged in to watch live with us today. I thought it would be helpful to explain a little bit about what the National Housing Federation is for anyone who hasn't encountered us before. The National Housing Federation is the trade body for housing associations, and that means we represent housing associations and we do things like campaigns and research and events for the benefit of our members. We've got nearly 800 housing association members, and between them, they provide homes for about 6 million people. That's quite a lot. All of our members have chosen to join the National Housing Federation, and it's really important to note that we're not like a regulator. We can't and wouldn't ever really tell our housing association members what to do. Instead, we achieve really positive outcomes by working collaboratively with them and supporting them. And Together with Tenants is a really good example of how we can create change in that way. So we move on to my presentation. I'll talk for about 8 minutes now, and I'll go over how we developed Together with Tenants, how we've tested it with our members, and then what rollout and sign up means in practice. So the starting point for the National Housing Federation was in sort of 2017, 2018, when there was some really crucial questions being asked in the housing association sector, along the lines of the ones that I've listed here. So do you genuinely involve residents in decisions that are affecting their homes and communities? Are housing associations being as open and responsive as they could be when they're communicating with residents, even when things go wrong? And have housing associations recognise the needs of residents and also the skills that they can bring in finding solutions? And that's really speaking to the value of the lived experience that residents have in terms of living in those homes and in bringing that knowledge into housing associations' decision making. So that was our starting point. We went out to consultation with a couple of ideas. We consulted with 500 people, which includes a mix of housing association residents and housing association staff. We also conducted an online consultation, which attracted 2,500 responses, and around 80% of those were from residents themselves. So we were really confident that we were hearing resident voice throughout our consultation. We established the Together with Tenants plan, which I'll talk about in a second, and all of our work has been guided by our member steering group, which are a group of chief executive of housing associations. So they guide us in terms of what's achievable and practical within a housing association. And then our tenant advisory panel, and some of those members are joining us today in this webinar. I won't say too much about the panel because they're going to talk about it themselves, and they'll do a much better job than I could. So the Together with Tenants 4-point plan is listed here. And the first point was around a new requirement in the National Housing Federation's Code of Governance for boards to be accountable to their residents. So the Code of Governance is a way for housing associations to demonstrate their compliance with regulation, but then go beyond that. And the National Housing Federation Code of Governance sets the standard that we expect housing associations to achieve. Signing up to our Code of Governance is voluntary, but I'm really pleased to say the majority of our members do sign up to it. And we've just relaunched our new Code of Governance with this requirement in yesterday. And it's all over sort of social media and Twitter, so if you're interested, do check that out, but not now. Stay here with us now. The second point of our 4-point plan was the Together with Tenants Charter, and I'll go on and talk about that in a second. The third and really important part of our 4-point plan was around resident oversight. So we wanted to make sure that Together with Tenants wasn't just going to be a charter that housing associations, would do as a tick box exercise. They'd stick it as a plaque on the wall and they'd say, oh, we've done Together with Tenants, that's fine. The crucial part of Together with Tenants and the key to its success is that residents have oversight of it. So housing associations need to work in partnership with their residents to establish how the housing association is going to report back to their residents on the progress against the charter. The fourth point of the 4-point plan was around giving residents a stronger collective voice with the regulator, so that when standards that residents should expect, when those standards weren't being met, what was the trigger point for intervention from the regulator? So the Together with Tenants Charter. This charter we wrote collaboratively with the Tenant Advisory Panel, and it comprises 6 key points that reflect from all of the work we did in the consultation, the issues that residents told us mattered most to them. And they cover the six following issues here. So relationships, communication, voice and influence, accountability, quality of housing, and what happens when things go wrong. The full charter is available on the National Housing Federation website, so I won't run through it now, but do again go and have a look at it if you're interested. And we tested our charter for a year with 130 of our housing association members and their residents. So over the course of testing the charter, so we wrote the charter and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just going to exist in isolation, that it was practical and it was useful and that it would create meaningful change for housing associations and their residents that adopted it. So we went out to our members and we said, would anybody like to help us test this charter? And we were absolutely bowled over by the level of response from our members. We collected a group of 130 early adopters, but actually the interest was higher than that. It was just that we had to put a cut-off point somewhere to keep the group at a manageable size. So those 130 early adopters implemented the charter within their organisation. And there's a full report on our website which tells you about all of the different ways that members ran with Together with Tenants and all the different experiences they had as they sort of travelled that journey from a starting point and then adopting the charter and then working with residents and then starting to see some outcomes. We used the feedback of our 130 early adopters to develop some resources to support rollout to the wider sector. So we were in the testing phase and we said, what do we need to do? What do we need to provide to help support our members to do this really, really well? And the early adopters fed back what that would look like. And some of it is about briefings and guidance. Some of it is about sharing examples and good practice. And then some of it is about creating networks so housing associations can speak to each other and share ideas. We tested the charter for flexibility to ensure that it would apply across all of our members. So we've got nearly 800 members and they range from housing associations who have 300 homes right up to housing associations who've got thousands and thousands. So we tested it to make sure that it would apply across all of our members in all the different locations that they work in. and we collected a range of examples of how they have worked on Together with Tenants. So once we'd finished our testing with our early adopters, we now knew that we were ready to launch this to the rest of our members and the broader sector. And we did that on the 20th of October this year. And we did it as an open invitation for the sector to sign up, because as I mentioned, we're not in a position to tell anyone what to do. This is about collaborative working and support. So we invited our housing association members to sign up. And we've offered those resources to help them to do this. So we've got a summary report that I mentioned earlier. We've got guidance on key issues. We've got webinars. So we have this webinar. We've got another webinar for members next week. And then as we move through January into the rest of the year, we have a further series of webinars to keep that learning and keep that interest going. And then we're setting up some networks to allow everybody to collaborate and discuss with their peers. So what does it mean to sign up to Together with Tenants? I mentioned before that Together with Tenants is not a tick box exercise. It's not business as usual. It's not a case of getting the charter and saying, oh, we kind of do this already, it's fine. Being an adopter of Together with Tenants is a commitment that our members are making to reinvigorate resident engagement, to work collaboratively with their residents to design those mechanisms for oversight. So working with residents to say, how would you like us to report on progress against the charter? What is meaningful to you in terms of the way we are going to tell you what we're doing? We're asking our housing association members to support their residents, to hold the organisation to account, and also to be open to the challenge that all of this brings, because for some organisations this is quite new, and so being ready to accept the challenges is one of our requests to them. Practically, signing up as an adopter, formally adopting Together with Tenants, our members are committing to taking the Point Charter to their board and having discussions at board level about how that will be implemented in the organisation, holding some form of consultation with their residents about the charter. So for some organisations, they held, obviously pre-pandemic times, they held huge events with residents where they had sort of 100 residents from different housing associations coming together to think about the charter and think about resident voice more collectively. But then also consultation could be things like working with your existing groups, so your existing scrutiny panel, your existing resident board members. Holding some form of consultation with colleagues about the charter is another really important part of sign up. And that means taking the charter into your internal meetings and making sure that the messages contained in the charter are spreading right across the staff of the organisation. So it really is a whole organisation approach and you know, a reinvigorated way of working with residents. And then finally, we're asking members when they adopt Together with Tenants to publish their plans for how the charter will be implemented and how residents will have oversight, so that every resident, even if they've not been involved previously, can see that the housing association is an adopter and that they are committing to report back on their progress as an adopter. In terms of the future of Together with Tenants is a long-term commitment, and even when we worked with our early adopters for a year to see how they were going to progress through adopting the charter and making it work in their organisation, we found that it was really long-term, you know, to have those conversations, to put in motion the different aspects of making the charter work is absolutely a long-term commitment, and it can't be taken lightly. So change will take time. And the Federation is absolutely committed to that as well. You know, Together with Tenants isn't going anywhere, and we'll be reporting on our progress as we go along. Together with Tenants is absolutely an opportunity to look again at relationships between residents and landlords. And that's what our housing association members told us was most powerful about Together with Tenants, is it was like something to hang your hat on. It was like a catalyst to start those conversations. But then the housing associations and the residents themselves to design how that would work for them locally in a very sort of specific and organic way for them. So this certainly isn't National Housing Federation sort of pushing an agenda or pushing a way of doing things. This is about, here's an idea, and then housing associations and their residents really making it their own and making it relevant for them. And overall, our aspiration across Together with Tenants, across the changes to the Code of Governance that we've put in place, Our overall aspiration is to strengthen these relationships between residents and their landlords and really make sure that resident voice is at the heart of strategic decision making. That is the end of my slides. Here's the website if you want to have a look, but obviously the website link will come out to you at the end of this webinar. I'm now going to hand over to Valerie, who's the chair of our tenant advisory panel, for her to give her perspective on Together with Tenants.
Thank you, Fleur. Hi, everyone. I'm the chair. I'm Valerie Oldfield. I'm the chair of the Tenants Advisory Panel, and we call ourselves TAP for short. On behalf of TAP, I warmly welcome you and thank you for arranging time to be in here today. As I and my colleagues introduce ourselves to you today, you'll see at the bottom on the screen random quotes from members of TAP on Together with Tenants. So I'm asking you to multitask by listening and reading the quotes from members at the same time. So TAP was formed by the Centre of Governance and Security as an independent panel to work in partnership with the National Housing Federation to give advice on Together with Tenants. Presently, there are 12 residents in TAP. We are all very diverse from all over England, from different sized housing associations, different backgrounds, and different situations. Working in partnership with the National Housing Federation, we have given advice, we challenge, and we have made recommendations. We want to encourage real change. Everything we do is aimed to create a stronger, balanced relationship between residents and landlords. We worked on the Charter, ensuring that it is meaningful, realistic, understandable for residents and housing associations, promoting change in culture. We said that the Charter should take prominence with local commitments added. We said we must truly empower residents to be involved in decision making and housing associations to see the benefits and value of this. We gave our views on how to create effective partnership from a resident's perspective, that the change in the Code of Governance should be linked to regulation. Meaningful languages, well, I should say meaningful language to be in the plan. Also, communication between landlords and residents, promoting better engagement and involvement. We encourage prominent resident oversight to ensure residents' voices are heard, and oversight on the progression and performance against the Charter. We have our own meetings independently, and we also have joint meetings with the National Housing Federation and the Members Steering Group. Collectively, we worked on the plan and charter and gave input on the rollout for Together with Tenants. We have been involved with the National Housing Federation's conferences, speaking, being part of discussion panels, and to name a few, we've been involved in the National Housing Federation Summit, the Board of Excellence in Housing, the Customer Experience in Housing, Building Safety Conference, and Smaller Housing Associations Conference. But more importantly, we have had representatives from TAP that were part of the working party on the revision of the National Housing Federation's Code of Governance. We are all very passionate about Together with Tenants. We don't want it to be seen as another initiative, a tick box exercise just to make housing associations look good. This initiative is different to past ones. Why? Well, the sad tragedy of Grenfell sparked conversation all over the place. The social housing green paper was produced. The Housing Ombudsman has a new complaints handling code and a new way of working, which with enhanced power, and with public reporting, they're now naming housing associations who receive severe maladministration judgments. Check out the Housing Ombudsman's website. They're also doing webinars for residents. The revised National Housing Federation's Code of Governance ensures Together with Tenants is entwined and linked to regulation. Together with Tenants is not just for now or for a few years, it's forever. Myself personally, I'm really looking forward to answering your questions. But before I do, I would like to hand you over to my colleagues, and the first one being Janet, who is going to elaborate to you why you are so important to Together with Tenants. Janet?
Hello, everybody. Well, as Val said, my name is Janet, and I've been a member of TAP since the beginning, as all three of us have been, in fact. And I want to speak to you today about, as residents, celebrating the beginning of this new way of partnership working. This is something really new. I guess that most of you who are here today have actually been involved residents for some time. I think you probably have, and if you haven't, you soon will be. I would like you now to think of this. I want you now to go away from here today and reach out to other residents in your housing associations who actually have not as yet become involved. Because like you, they have got what Fleur referred to, lived experience of living in a housing association. And that is so important. That is something that is so valuable because it's something that virtually all staff and virtually all board members have never had. And they're making decisions on something of which they have not got the basic day-to-day experience. So the more of us that we can have involved in our own housing associations, the better it's going to be. Many of these residents don't know anything about Together with Tenants, and so if you involve them, it's going to be a totally new start for them. There's such a lot going on in social housing at the moment. As Valerie said, the Ombudsman has been talking about it a lot, and she has directed you to look at the website. There's an awful lot to be learnt there, and they actually have some wonderful seminars going on. The regulator has been involved. Actually, that was one of the things that we were hoping for and looking forward to. The government white paper should be coming out fairly soon, we hope. That's on the cards. I think it can't be too long away. And the Code of Governance, the National Housing Federation Code of Governance, which has been revised and was brought into public domain yesterday. And that is wonderful because it's actually putting tenants where they should be, right in the forefront of everything that housing association does. And they are actually making tenants such a more important part of their work through all their departments. And all these things that I've just mentioned are all actually reinforcing this importance of partnership. Partnership is this really important word, a partnership between the tenants and the landlords. So the way forward, what's the way forward? Well, I think we need more involvement, we all know that. And we need to build relationships, perhaps even rebuild relationships with our landlords. So we need to be prepared to take this active part and communicate with the landlord. Don't be afraid. At the end of the day, they're trying to do the same thing as well. It's coming from both sides. And I just ask you this, please don't worry about it. Tell everyone you can. Tell your residents in every way you can. Write to residents or get your housing association to write to residents or actually do both. And educate. Now that sounds a bit harsh, but there are people who need to know because they don't know yet and they need to know. So use newsletters where you can. Make sure it's on your housing association website and use any other local connections that you personally have. Take advantage of what help is available to you. There's quite a lot out there. The National Housing Federation have got a lot. TPAS, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, have got a lot on their website. Even the Ombudsman and Regulator have got things that you can read on their website. And there's lots in trade papers. If you read Inside Housing and other magazines, you will find lots of information. And if you are not already an involved resident and are here today, please make contact with those people who already are involved in your housing association. I'm sure they'll be so happy to see you and answer all your questions and help you along the road. Be prepared to take part with your landlord. As I said before, don't worry about it, just actually be prepared for that and make sure that you communicate with them. I think, you know, a little email to somebody, perhaps not your CEO, but somebody else you might know by name, would not come amiss. And if they're not the right person, they will soon put you in touch with whoever is, because it's not only us as residents who want you involved, it's the landlords as well. That is something really important now. So, ask questions. Ask questions of your landlord. If there's something you don't know, ask where you can find it out. Of course, in these days, it's not as simple as it used to be, where you could probably see someone face to face and ask, but you know, you can look on the website for things, you can actually phone up someone. If you have, and most of you will have some resident involvement team, they will be really happy. Excuse me. So there we are. Take advantage of it. Ask the questions. You can never, ever know too much. The danger for all of this is for residents to sit back and do nothing. That's where it will come amiss. We must actually keep going on this path that we've started along today. It's really important. And I'd just like to reiterate to you that what happens next on this journey is actually dependent on us. It's dependent to a great deal on the residents. If we sit back and do nothing, we are asking for nothing to actually change. Thank you. And I'd like now to hand you over to my colleague, Neil, who's going to speak to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Neil. I have been an engaged tenant for 10 years across all aspects of tenant involvement. I would like to give you an example of how we have embraced together with tenants. My housing association is fairly large, with 46,000 properties. They've had their ups and downs of tenant involvement over the years, sometimes more downs than ups. Last year, they agreed to be an early adopter for Together with Tenants. That basically meant they would monitor the impact of using the charter and see how it fared, reporting back to the National Housing Federation. My housing association took the bold leap to completely dissolve all tenant engagement when they enrolled as an early adopter, taking the Together with Charter on board and rebuilding tenant involvement from the ground up, with tenants involved in every single meeting on how to rebuild it. We worked on common ground and together found the best way to move forward, achieving as close as possible what the tenants and the housing association wanted from it. Here is an example of one of those changes. Scrutiny. We found scrutiny was severely lacking. The tenants involved were finding it quite disappointing. It mainly worked on KPIs, and because our housing association is so big and spread right across the country, any changes that were made by any scrutiny panel were not really affecting the tenants on the ground. That they were minor changes to wording and things like that, and it just wasn't very satisfactory. We expressed this concern to the housing association, and they said that we do need to look at KPIs and keep scrutiny at that level. But they also respected the fact that we need to change scrutiny and look at it at a more local level. So the decision was made to break scrutiny up. And what we're moving forward is we are going to have local scrutiny, which we will get feedback from the property managers, which in our case are members of staff who go onto the estates and look at ground maintenance issues, rubbish, etc., etc. we will be getting direct feedback from them to the local scrutiny panels, and the scrutiny panels will have the chance to directly alter those situations on the ground level. This will make a huge impact to tenants because they will finally see something being done at a local level in their communities. And the way to move forward with that is we are using something called hackathons, which is not only used in this sector, but across other sectors, where we will gather the information, we will get all the people who are involved. Let's say, for sake of argument, there is an issue with ground maintenance. We will get the heads of ground maintenance into a room with the tenants in the local area, sit them down for a day and openly discuss how the issues can be rectified that are causing the problems and the feedback. And in the same day, find a solution, implicate the solution, and then check that solution over the coming weeks and months to make sure it has worked correctly. For us as a tenant, this is groundbreaking because we will see big changes. The second thing that came up during the scrutiny conversation was we have over 60 assisted living properties, which are in their own little units. They have never really come under scrutiny because they have their own little unique bubble of organisation. So again, what we've decided to do is have workshops of scrutiny that will arrive at these various sites and have on the spot scrutiny hackathons, even if it's something as simple as making sure the bins are put in a certain place so there's wheelchair access, but it's something that may be affecting residents within those little communities. Again, it's something that my housing association has never ever thought of doing. This is how we are moving forward, and we feel it's very, very groundbreaking. And what is most important is using, together with tenants and using the charter, we have completely built this up from the ground up, but making sure that tenants and the housing association are always sat in the same room together, and never is a decision made without us being involved. And I am just suggesting to you that maybe when you talk to your housing association, this could be something that you could think about. It is how we want to see, together with tenants implicated across the sector. So that's my bit, and I will pass you back to Fleur.
Thank you, Neil and Valerie and Janet. That was lovely. That was really insightful. And whilst you've been talking, I've been keeping an eye on the questions as they've come in. We've had lots, which is brilliant. And they are a mix, some for me and some for you. So I will start with a question. It's kind of a question and a comment. So it says, I'm the chair of a tenants panel, and I find that there is a big gap in the link between the housing association and its tenants. I'm struggling to get the housing association to actually get involved and be willing to listen to our ideas. It seems they have their own plans, and all they do is ask us as a group to look over things, but they rarely take in our ideas or our input. Are there any tips that you have for making a better working relationship to hold the housing association more accountable if they are signed up together with tenants? I really don't feel like they are holding up their end of the bargain. So I think the question there is about have you got any advice on how to work better in existing scrutiny mechanisms, or potentially, as Neil says, to dissolve them, to make sure that the housing association just doesn't treat residents as kind of a like, can you check this? Okay, fine, you know, as it's actually genuinely collaborative work.
One suggestion I have is try and demonstrate to your housing association the value of tenant involvement. There is an awful lot of tenants out there with an awful lot of knowledge and an awful lot of experience. It is a resource that your housing association can seriously tap on and use to their benefit. If you can demonstrate that ability that tenants have for their housing association, then it would be, I hate to say, foolish for your housing association to ignore them. That's my bit.
I'd like to say something now, Claire. I would just like to say that I think one of the most valuable things that as a tenant you can do is to actually try to foster personal relationships so that the staff know who you are and you know who they are and what they do. We've found that particularly valuable because it just eases, it actually sort of oils the wheels in some way. And don't try to think of don't you try to think of it as a you and us situation. Just try to make it out. What we're looking for is working together, working in partnership. So just whenever you have the opportunity, and I know it's not so easy these days, but try whenever you can to actually know people by name, speak to them by name when you can, and tell them anything that they need to know about you. If you have a specific question, email it to a person whose name you know, who is the relevant person, and just send that in and do it all the time. So you build up long-term relationships with those people that you need to have relationships with.
I'd like to add to what Neil and Janet said. As you're part of a group already, I think what you would need to do is just go to your housing association as a collective, as a group, and say that you just want to speak with them, meet with them and speak with them. But prior to that, for your group to get something together to say how and what you want. So have that all down. If you can give it to them in advance so that they know about it before you actually meet, and then discuss it through and just tell them what you want and show them the benefits of you being involved without just being a body that gives feedback on what they think or what they've already done. Say you want to be involved at the beginning, that doing that will save them time and money, so they don't have to go back and keep changing things, because you'll be involved with things at the beginning. And also you're going to be giving it from a resident's perspective, so that's something different for them to consider at an earlier stage rather than a later stage. So just go there and just tell them, we want to talk.
That's great advice. Thank you. So we've had a question, which is kind of a bit theoretical. Put it to you anyway. Do the panel have a view on the best way for resident voice to be represented? Is it through the more traditional elected committees for tenant and resident associations? So elected committees in a sort of in a more with a constitution and a more of a unionised approach, or is it around sample surveys and instant feedback? Does the panel have any view on those differing methods? Neil, do you want to go first?
The simple answer is, and I know it's a bit of a too simple, but realistically, just do what works better for you and your housing association. There is no set what is the best here. However it works within your organisation and what both parties are comfortable with, then that is how you proceed.
Thanks, Neil. Valerie, did you want to come in?
Yes. It's also because Together with Tenants is a thing for all residents. So every resident should have the opportunity to have their voice heard. Now that can be done in so many different ways, but just as Neil said, it depends on what's best for your housing association and what's prominent for you in your area and how your housing association is set up. But I would say, if for all housing associations should be looking at different ways in order to ensure that every resident has a voice. And maybe it means each individual resident giving information via website or phoning up or through the questionnaires, but collectively residents should have a voice in some way or other.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had a question from somebody who I think is an involved resident, and I think that they're getting at that it's quite hard as an involved resident to it can be quite hard to sort of like reach out and encourage other residents to join and see the value of the voice the value of sort of like contributing their time and efforts to the housing association. So I wondered if you had any advice, or this question is around how do we get more residents involved in the housing association? Neil?
This was one of the reasons, as the example I gave over scrutiny, one of the reasons why we wanted to go in and do scrutiny at a more local level and affect communities is because then other tenants would actually see the impact of being involved. And hopefully, by doing that, it would draw more involved tenants in. I mean, one of our plans is that when we come into a community to resolve an issue, we'll actually hire the local community centre and then put an invite to the tenants on the streets or the street which have been affected by the issue, actually bring them in for the evening so they can actually watch the process go through. And then hopefully when they leave, go, actually, I enjoyed that. I want to do more of that. And also just get your housing association to advertise it as much as possible via emails, websites, and whatever method they've got. And get tenants to talk on behalf of tenants, because when other tenants ask other tenants to be involved, it's a lot more effective than staff members asking, we find.
Thank you. Janet, go ahead.
Yes, Boo. Yes, I was just listening with great interest to what Neil was saying, because it chimes with me. And we have in our housing association, some involved tenants have actually written an open letter to all residents, actually encouraging this. And we actually went to some pains to decide how best this should be put out in public domain, because posting it is rather difficult, and it's not so easy to see people face to face now. You know, a meeting is great, but you can't do that at the moment. So it's actually going to be put on our magazine, which will be going out fairly shortly. And it is actually quite clearly a letter from other residents to them. So we are hoping that that's going to have some results. Certainly the idea that you have, Neil, about having meetings in halls, this sounds really great. We have in the past actually had pop-up events in the streets occasionally. But unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be very productive, because people in the streets tend to be trying to do something else at the time. So it's probably not the best thing. But I do think that actually anything that we can actually do ourselves in the way of sending out the message, as I say, by an open letter, I think is probably the best idea that we've come up with so far. We wait to see what happens after it's gone out.
Thank you. So there's a question here for me, which is around consultation with the BME community in terms of Together with Tenants. And I think the thing to know about Together with Tenants is that the National Housing Federation worked to develop it with our member steering group on our tenant advisory panel. But then we kind of gave it to housing associations for housing associations to make it their own. So in terms of direct consultation with certain groups or certain residents in certain housing associations, that's something that we're trusting our members to take forward and do themselves. It's really important that Together with Tenants is around giving housing associations and their residents the tools to do it themselves, rather than us trying to enforce an agenda on them. And I've also had a question about consultation or testing with people who live in supported housing or people with access needs or disabilities. And again, there is some of our early adopters did offer supported housing schemes, and there is a blog on our website from Advance, who are a specialist provider. And so if that is something you're interested in, have a look at the blog, and then maybe we can think about setting up some kind of email conversation between specialist providers, if that is something that would be useful to kind of share practice on how you can use Together with Tenants in that scenario. There's a question here. Do we know when the government's white paper is likely to be published? Soon, very soon, get ready. So Together with Tenants was sort of born out of, or came around the same time as the Green Paper was published. The Green Paper had some really, significant things to say about resident relationships in it. And Together with Tenants was actually mentioned in the Green Paper as having sort of potential to bring change. And I'm really happy and I'm really confident that, you know, 2 years later, it's been a long old wait for this white paper, but 2 years later, we've actually got some really positive evidence of the impact of Together with Tenants that we can look at in the context of the white paper when it comes. But very soon, I think, is when we can expect the white paper. Let me just have a quick look. Neil, what housing association are you from? And please, could you say a little bit more about hackathons?
Right, okay, I'm from Orbit. Yeah, the idea of a hackathon is that there will be a small amount of investigation work at the start of it, or whatever investigation work there is needed. Then, once the investigation work is done, so we've got the evidence, the idea is that whatever we're investigating, and I'll just use ground maintenance as an example, we will make sure that anyone within my housing association, anyone that is at the head of any section that involves ground maintenance, will be invited in to a meeting. The idea of the meeting will be like an all-day meeting in the morning and in the afternoon. Tenants will be there as well, and some tenants who, depending on the hackathon and depending what's going on, if they are being directly affected by it, they will also be invited. And then the idea is in the morning we can go through the evidence, see what the issues is, break for lunch, and then in the afternoon all work together to see how we can solve the issues. And then because we've got the head of departments there in the room, we can actually get them to sign off on any changes or anything that's put into place on the day. So we haven't got to wait for people to approve it. It's done on the day. And then from that point, we will then monitor whether these changes have made the impact that we wanted. And of course, if they haven't, then we've got the opportunity to come back into another hackathon and try something else. But hopefully, because everyone sat around the table, then it should all be solved in that one day. But obviously, we are aware during COVID, it's going to be a bit different. So we're working as best we can, but this is for the future.
Thank you. So we've had a question in, and I'm just, so this person is saying, and I think we're all aware of this really, if we're being honest, I can send numerous case studies of poor and very poor service delivery from a number of different housing associations. These case studies clearly demonstrate that the great advice being given today by the panel is not being listened to. And I think we can acknowledge that there is some really poor practice in the sector and it's not good enough and it needs to change. Together with Tenants is a long-term initiative, and it's about changing the culture, and it's about, you know, strengthening these relationships. It's about bringing residents into the decisions that housing associations make. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that comment and kind of put it in the context of Together with Tenants. We've also had some really lovely comments in for the panel. I wanted to say how impressive it is what you've all been saying and confirming what you've all mentioned. We've got a long way to go to change attitudes within housing associations, tuned as they are to their great pressures. And I think we have to approach them without forgetting to mention that we're all batting on the same team. And I think that's really positive, that we don't always get it right, but we're always aiming in the same direction. I'm just scrolling through these questions now. Panel, could you say a little bit more about how you were recruited to be on the tenant advisory panel? We've had a few questions about that.
Hello. Hi. Yes. We were recruited by the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny, and that's an organisation that does what it says on the tin. And we was just, I think some of us were told about it through our housing associations, and some of us, we saw it advertised through on the internet or from social media, and just applied. So we all just wrote in, said why we want to be part of the Residents Advisory Panel, and they went through like an interview process, and then that's how we was chosen. So it was in various different ways, really.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Janet, there were originally about 160 applicants for it. It was whittled down to 15. We have lost a couple of members just because they've decided to leave. But yeah, so and originally we were here for a year, but that's been extended, thankfully, and we're still working really hard with the National Housing Federation, and it's something that we all really enjoy, and we've all really benefited from it, to be honest.
Yes, could I just say that actually it's been very interesting, hasn't it? I think Neil and Valerie will agree with me that we went through this selection process, which was writing in and then having 1 or 2 phone interviews afterwards, and then we were told, those of us who are here were told that we would be on the panel. But it's the most amazing thing is that these 15 people were actually selected with no input from us other than our application. But actually from the very first meeting that we had, we gelled together so very, very well. I think I'm quite right in saying that we actually work together perfectly, really. We all have our individual strengths and weaknesses, but the end result is absolutely wonderful.
Yes, the thing with that. Oh, sorry, Neil. I was just going to say the thing with that is that we were all very passionate, and we all had the same view, and we all had the same goal that we wanted to reach to, which I think every resident has the same. We just want our housing association and us to have a very good relationship, to receive good services, and to gain understanding from the housing association's perspective, and we want the housing association to understand things from our perspective, and for us to all work together so that, but in the ideal world, everybody's happy and everybody gets what they want. Neil,
and just yeah, and finally, we are a very diverse group. We've got like young mothers to more mature people, disabled. So we feel there is a good, you know, cross sort of a group of tenants who are speaking. So we're not all sort of one type, if that makes sense.
And just for my part, it's an absolute pleasure to work with the Tenant Advisory Panel. They're completely independent to the Federation, so their voice in challenging us is really important. And to reassure everyone, they do provide a lot of very robust challenge, which is excellent. And it's been such a learning journey. The Federation's never worked with a resident panel before, because our members are housing associations, but actually working in this way it's just been absolutely fantastic and a real joy from my perspective. We've got time for one more question, and this is just a very practical one about how are you all managing to get together during COVID?
Via this method.
That's it.
That's it.
Yeah, by this method. And also we keep in contact via emails, sending off emails to each other, and also using social media. We when we get together and we talk, you know, independently, not as an arranged meeting, we talk about all different types of things. We talk a lot about what's happening in the social housing sector, and you know, especially with building really truly affordable social housing homes, and not affordable homes, because the affordable homes is not really affordable for everyone. And also we take note that the government is now pushing forward this shared ownership, which is really only available to a small sector. I mean a small proportion of residents that need homes. I mean, homes is needed for everyone. Don't get us wrong. Everybody knows that everybody needs homes, all different types of homes in all different perspectives. What we're asking for is a balance. So it reflects what is needed, what is actually really needed. And I think that over the years, social housing with social housing rents have been forgotten, and it's kind of like, you know, not really being invested in. as much. So we want to bring that up as well as working with our housing associations, really getting to understand how housing associations work. And I think that's really down to the house. Sorry for going on, but I really think that's how the housing associations need to really take ownership to say, we should be more open and transparent in what we do, how we work, and the challenges that they face. I mean, they face different challenges than what you would think a normal organization, a social organization would, as well as a business, because they're kind of like a bit of both. So housing associations should share all their trials and tribulations and how they work with residents. Residents should welcome that and try and learn as much from that. But equally, housing associations should welcome the things that they're told by residents. Don't take it as being criticized. Look at it as informed information that they can work on together with residents.
Thank you, Valerie. And I think that just shows the passion of our tenant advisory panel. And I know Val sort of strayed into territory outside of Together with Tenants, but I think it all links together, doesn't it? It's all we're all on the same team. We all want the same things, and I think we can absolutely agree that we need to build more homes for social rent. That's what we need. Anyway, it's now time to wrap up this webinar, and just to say quickly, we had a few questions about future webinars. Future webinars will be for housing association staff and housing association residents. There's no bar on who can attend either of them, but we might direct you to one or the other. On your screens now, there is a poll for you to fill out about the event today. And I'd just like to say a quick thank you to everyone on the panel, to Valerie, Janet and to Neil, and thank you for your time today.